Hi, and welcome to the Rental Realm, where transparency meets opportunity in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Nicole, traveling full-time in an RV, connecting with real estate agents and investors across the U.S. to give you an inside look at what's really happening in our rental markets. From short-term to long-term rentals, we're uncovering the numbers behind these deals. Today, I have someone I met over the internet, actually, on our podcast, and we've quickly become friends, and super excited to have Britney on. She's a real estate investor and also an awesome short-term rental designer. So we're going to talk a little bit about her market today and some design stuff for short-term rentals. But Britney, thank you so much for being on. I'm super excited to have you today.
Thank you, Nicole, for having me on Rental Realm today. I've been so excited for this, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with you more.
Thank you so much. So just to get started, I would love for you to tell everyone how you actually just got started in real estate.
Yeah, so it's kind of a fun story. I had no idea this was what I was going to be doing. I actually had a really good friend who was in real estate in the Northern Virginia area, and I would sometimes do like ride-alongs and stuff like that, and it was fun, but I never thought that I was going to do it myself. And then I had to get creative for my parents' anniversary. So between their anniversaries, they've been married for over 30 years, birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, stuff like that, I get creative with gifts. So a few years back, my dad is a history buff, and he hadn't been to Colonial Williamsburg in that Jamestown area since he was like 10 years old. And he's been saying, okay, you live in Washington, D.C., like it's a 2.5-hour drive. Let's do this one of the times we visit. So I was like, okay. So I was like, perfect, for their anniversary, I'll get us like a hotel or an Airbnb. So I looked in the Williamsburg area and I did not see anything good, which shocked me because I had been looking and like months in advance. And so I'm like, okay, this is really strange. So then I ended up finding a place about 30 minutes away in Hampton, Virginia. So it's like right in between. If Williamsburg is like up here, Hampton's here, and then right below, like 30 miles south, is Virginia Beach. And okay, I was like, nice. I was like, it's actually, the Airbnb is right down the street from a beach, and my mom loves the beach. So we had grown up, because I lived in Oklahoma, going to like, if you're going to go to the beach, you're usually going to go to like, you have to fly somewhere. So you're going to go to like South Florida or the Caribbean or something like that. We didn't do like the Gulf Shores or Ocean City, Maryland, or even Virginia Beach because we were going to have to fly anyways, but we ended up really liking it. And then we were driving around and there was a house for sale, like right on the beach. And I looked at it and I felt like it was pretty affordable. And even my father, who does not really give me his blessings on a lot of things, he doesn't like to take big risks. He even said, wow, you know what? You should really invest in this. This is like a really good price. And so that house had 8 or 9 offers already. So then I started looking in the area. A few months later, found a place, purchased it. And the idea was for it to be a second home. And then I was going to rent it out to pay the mortgage, like Airbnb. And I was like, oh yeah, like it'll rent out over the summer or something. And it ended up booking every week pretty much. And there was a whole bunch of reasons. It'd be like military, or even like conferences, or maybe family trips. So many different reasons that I hadn't even thought of, and all year round. Like I was shocked. Like I closed on it in like November of 21 and then was already getting bookings like end of December and January. And I was like, wow, I really thought this was going to be mostly like a summer thing. And then I realized, I was like, wow, okay, so this is going well. And I had this itch to do an all pink place. So I ended up a few months later finding a place in Nashville and closing on it so that it could be all pink. I was down to like the Scottsville and Nashville market. I ended up picking Nashville because I've had a change of heart on this, but at the time I figured I didn't want to manage a pool. And then in addition to it, Nashville is closer to me in DC than Scottsdale is. So that really just kicked it off.
I love that so much. And it's just fun to hear how everyone got started in real estate. And I think that's one of the more unique ones. You are really going above and beyond for your gift giving. I need to step up my game after hearing that, but absolutely love how you got started in it. And you did two relatively quick. I don't think I realized how quick that you went from your first one to the second one.
Yeah, it was definitely back to back.
I love it. And it's been going well, but would love to hear what actually the market's like there. I am from Maryland originally, don't know much about that area. Hear a little bit about Virginia Beach, but what is some of the draws? I know you talked about it a little bit, that you've got way more attention than you were actually originally anticipating. So tell us about your market.
Yes. So the Virginia area, it's like Hampton Roads encompasses that whole area. I love my location because it's definitely more affordable. It's definitely a lot more up and coming and getting better and better by the second. So it's a perfect spot too, because I do have visitors that come in and they're going to like Colonial Williamsburg and Jamestown. And if you haven't been, I would definitely recommend it. It's so cool. It's like pretty much reenacting those times. And I'm like a huge fan. And then there's also like a Busch Gardens. And I think it's one of the biggest water parks, don't quote me on this, in the US that's right there. So I've done all of it. Then there's obviously Virginia Beach if you go south, which has, you know, the big, long, like 3.5 mile, like boardwalk, which is super fun. And, you know, lots of attractions over there. It's close to Norfolk, Newport News. There's a bunch of colleges around there too. My spot's actually right next to Hampton University, which is an HBCU. It's like walking distance. So that definitely brings in a lot of people for like graduations, orientations, homecoming. It's like a really good spot. And then just down the street in actual Hampton, there's this area called Downtown Phoebus, which has the best restaurants. It's like mom and pop, like really cute restaurants, like all different. There's like French, American, Mexican, like a bunch of different types of cuisine. And then there's also the NASA Museum, which you can walk to from my place too. And there's a golf course. So anytime, and I did the same thing in Nashville. Nashville's pretty obvious. It's like a lot of like bachelorette parties, birthday parties. So that's really what I was like targeting. And, you know, obviously Nashville is really, really growing too. They added a whole new terminal at the airport that has flights directly from Asia now.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's really blowing up. And so something that I really love to do, and this is what I want to continue to do as well, is that when I'm there, like setting the place up, or when I'm even just visiting, you know, getting a guidebook together, and I try every single local restaurant in the area. Same with Nashville, like the East Nashville area where my place is on Main Street is super up and coming. Lots of new like bars and restaurants and shops. And I like to try to support all the local businesses. And then that enables me to also give recommendations to the guests. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And one of my favorite parts about this is investing in areas that you do know, though, because I used to kind of believe you shouldn't invest in an area just because you know of it, because it might not be the best market. But what I've seen over the past few years is, and not that that's a small market, but sometimes these smaller pockets that you know your family went to vacation at when you were younger, those can be amazing markets versus now everyone's trying to go into the bigger cities, which there's a lot more competition. You need a lot more money to get started in those places versus going to areas that are not quite as well known. And that was another funny thing we connected on, was that I have one in Norfolk, Virginia that I'm working on. And when we first got that one, we're like, I don't know much about Norfolk. Let's see how this goes. And it's done phenomenal. Now that area was really tough and is tough still to get a permit on. So how are the permitting issues where you specifically are versus some of the little local areas? Like I think your area was easier to get in than Norfolk is showing to be extremely tough to get a short-term rental permit.
Oh, 100%. So first and foremost, Nashville is tough. Like you have to make sure you're working with an agent that really knows the zoning and all of that. And then in Hampton, Virginia, so it's actually kind of bad, but there really wasn't any laws on this. So you could put it anywhere. And then one of my good friends was actually kind of grilling me about it a few months ago and was like, looked it up on the internet. And this summer, there were actually starting to become changes that were going to be enacted like literally within the next month from now, that you have to have a permit. And I was like, thank goodness somebody like challenged me on that. Cause I'm like, how would you just like know that unless you start checking the internet? And now I know like when I work with, other investors and clients to be like, okay, this is something we really need to like continuously check on. And even if it's every 6 months, just like a cadence. But it wasn't too bad. Like in either situation, someone comes by and does like an inspection, you fill out the document, you go back and forth. But in both situations, in Nashville and in Hampton, everybody was really nice. And every city does it different, kind of like what you're saying in jurisdiction. So I don't know Norfolk specifically, even though it's literally just across the bridge for me. Like technically the end of Hampton to Norfolk is just like 2 seconds away. But because mine's like right at the tip of the peninsula, and then Norfolk is like right when you cross the bridge or the tunnel or whatever you want to call it. But I know in Hampton, the way they decided to do it was they split it up into zones, and there can only be a certain amount in each zone. So I was like, ooh, I better get on top of this and get my application in like right now to ensure that, because that's scary. But I think the silver lining is if I or anybody else was to ever invest in that area again, now that people got in their permits and stuff, you can now, like when you're cross-referencing with your agent, make sure that there's still spots in that zone. You could also probably talk to someone from the city to ensure that like there aren't a bunch of pending applications and you'll be fine. So not too worried about it, but it definitely, like if you're unfamiliar with the process, can seem daunting, but I'm confident now in my abilities to navigate it.
And that's actually great, I think, in your advantage that they are adding restrictions to it, because that was what we've seen in some of the markets we've been in where there weren't restrictions or they were very light restrictions, and some of those bigger areas got swamped over the past few years because they were letting anyone and everyone come in, versus I know with Norfolk, it's going to be, once the permit's all set, like it's going to be great because there's not that many competitors in the market. They are actually being strict and checking to see who has permits. And so it's an easy way to lessen the competition in those areas, though initially it's going to take more time and more money because it wasn't cheap either there to get the permitting done. But it's going to work out better in our advantage because there's not going to be as many people. So one good thing about that area, I would say for sure.
It's funny that you say that because this is so ironic, but earlier today, I had somebody submit a booking inquiry for January, and they have a birthday coming up, because I get those still. It's not just in Nashville that I get those, in Hampton. And they were like, hey, my other one had to cancel and fully refund because they didn't get their permit. And I'm not sure why that is, but I'm already starting to see literally what you were just describing, Nicole.
So you're going to get all those bookings. That's great for you. And everyone else is like, oh, we needed to get a permit months ago and there's no permit applications left. Like you're going to be in a great
scary
spot.
If you missed that and then you all of a sudden like weren't able to get one. I mean, I guess you could pivot to like a midterm or a long term, but that's not ideal because I'm biased, but short-term rentals are the best.
Absolutely. And I think the way I've stayed up to date, like in Palm Beach County, since there's so many different markets within Palm Beach County, being on the Facebook groups for those local Airbnb groups, which I don't know if there's one in your market. If there is, I will have to grab that from you. But that one, like for Boca Raton, they're constantly talking about the changes there. So your local Facebook Airbnb group, which you usually have to have a rental in that market to get into the Facebook group. So if you're looking to get into it, you kind of almost need to use someone else's account just to be like, yeah, I have an Airbnb I co-host with here.
So
but yeah, most of them are just hosts in the area. San Antonio is a great Facebook group. Cape Coral's pretty good too. So if there are Facebook groups in your area, that's been one way that we've been able to stay up to date on any changes in the market, because I think a lot more cities are going to start putting in regulations if they haven't yet, which ultimately, I think is the best thing for most of us in those markets, but can be challenging when you aren't keeping up to date on them and have to do it last minute.
For sure.
And just to hear a little bit more about your properties, would love to hear how your initial projections have compared to what you've actually been earning, if it's been better or kind of on track with what you were earning. And how did you even initially, I know it was new when you were getting in, how did you kind of analyze and think that, oh, this is going to be a really good deal?
So at the time for Virginia, I didn't, because my goal then, I didn't really realize that it was going to be a business. I really looked at it as like a second home, and then figured, okay, the mortgage is super affordable. Interest rates were really good back then as well. And I was like, this should not be hard to tackle. So that one was like a shoe-in and made sense. For Nashville, I did look a little bit more on AirDNA. The market has shifted a little bit, and that one hadn't ended up being quite as good as I thought. But I'm sure we'll get into this more, but there are little things that you can do with the same property to just make it more marketable and then in return be able to raise the prices from a nightly rate. So I looked on AirDNA initially and tried to get a good idea for that.
Awesome. AirDNA and Price Labs are definitely two of my favorite sites to use when analyzing. And I'll have to do one episode of just talking about those because there's a lot in both of those sites, but they're wonderful resources. It's getting harder with AirDNA, and we were talking about this separately the other day of analyzing properties, and that it's hard to just put the address in and have a good projection. I like to check and see what my properties I manage are actually showing in AirDNA versus what they're doing in real life. And I think one of them was earning double what AirDNA projected, and another one was almost half less than what AirDNA was projecting as it. So it's getting a little tougher in the market.
I feel like you can do your best, but it's like kind of a matter of opinion because you're right. Like you manage a lot of properties like successfully. So you can actually take the ones that you know the exact numbers on and you can run it, which is so helpful, but it can be kind of a toss up. And it's funny too, because we were just talking about this a few days ago offline and I was like, okay, this is the method I'm using. This is the spreadsheet I'm using. This is how I'm going about it. You're going about it a little different. I talked to one of my other friends who's going about it even different than we are. So it's definitely, I will say I'm a lot better off than I was when I was looking at it, a couple years back. I feel like I'm constantly like learning and refining that. I still feel like, with the changes, like there's always room for continuing education on it and, getting up to date with the trends in the market and all of that.
Especially in today's time, there's just so many sites, and there's another one that I want to join. It's just a bit more. It's kind of a monthly price as compared to AirDNA is the same price as it is yearly for AirDNA. So I haven't bit the bullet there yet, but there's so many different sites to be able to help analyze properties, and it can get overwhelming at the same time doing that. We used to use Mashvisor as well, which I haven't found that as helpful anymore as AirDNA and Price Labs. But when people are just getting started, it's a hard balance. Everyone wants that hard answer of, is this a good property? And unfortunately, we're not there yet, but there are some really cool people in the market too that I'm starting to connect with and learning that is all they do is actually help people find and analyze great deals. And that's another avenue, but you're going to have to be paying for that too. It's not going to be something that's done for free versus AirDNA. It's a lot more cost effective if you're willing to do the research there, but definitely takes a bit of time. And let me know if you actually do your own property management at your places. I'm assuming that you do since you offer co-hosting as well for clients. But what are some of the monthly expenses like at your properties just in general? I always like to hear the differences between, I'm very familiar with insurance costs down in Florida, which are outrageous, versus would love to hear a little bit about some of the fees that you're seeing on your regular basis up there. And if there are any hotel occupancy taxes that you get, we have hot taxes down in San Antonio, or the city and state taxes, if you are familiar with those off the top of your head.
There's definitely always, when I went to look for the place in Virginia, I had gotten the advice actually from like my mom or dad that were like, try to make sure it's out of a flood zone. Obviously, I know for Florida, the insurance is a little more complicated. So even though my place is like about 5-minute drive from a couple of beaches, it's still like out of the flood zone. So that kind of helped. And then the Virginia one is a house. So you have things like the lawn, stuff like that. I have the cleaner. I do self-manage both of the properties. Nashville, it's part of a condo association, and the condo association actually pays for the water, gas, electric, and your Wi-Fi. So it kind of makes it easier. I see it in a lot of places like a lot different depending on where you are. But I definitely had no idea at first I'd be managing it on my own. I'm actually a lot less stressed doing that. I couldn't find anybody good in that Virginia Beach area. So I ended up doing it and it worked well. You just have to have like a good team to partner with, like cleaning and maintenance. And then for Nashville, I started off with a couple of different property managers that ended up going extremely poorly. So I am now self-managing and my life has gotten so much easier. You'd think it would be a lot more work, but I think it's honestly because now I'm well versed because I was kind of having to clean up some of the mistakes that they made. So now I'm like, I absolutely love self-managing and enjoy having the opportunity coming up to do it for others as well. So I definitely prefer that route, but a lot of people don't because it's a lot of work and you need to know what to do and you have to actually enjoy it. I know you enjoy it as well, Nicole, but there's so many people that don't. So my best advice for people is to work with somebody like Nicole or myself who actually enjoy it and want to do it. Because if you're going to kind of give it half of your energy, it's probably going to go downhill. So it just really is your personality type for that.
It is a business and not a hobby when you're doing this. I always want to nail that down because a lot of people are getting into this thinking, or they're not adding that into their bottom line. They're like, oh, I'm going to self-manage this property, which on the low end, I've seen a few people recently charging 12% for full service co-hosting, which is pretty low end on the spectrum for that. I mean, if you're doing a long-term rental, 8 to 12% is what you see. But for short-term rentals, you're often charging 15 to 25. I think there's still some people doing 30%.
I've even seen some people doing 40 depending on the actual load.
That's insane. I don't know many houses at this point that are able to still cash flow for the owners if they're doing 40%. But I guess if they are handling supplies and maybe some other handyman, I've seen some companies that will include handyman expenses into that, which if you have a property that needs a lot of maintenance, that might not be a bad idea. But if someone is considering doing self-management, how would you say is the best transition kind of into that, especially since you went from having not great property managers and having to go back and fix some stuff to managing yourself?
Okay, I think the biggest piece of advice I would have, so we're in a company now full-time that I am now in a different division of the company, but our core capability is staffing. So I already was like well-versed in like being able to conduct interviews and be able to find like candidates for things. And so when I was hiring cleaners at both places initially, I had a few not work out. And now I have like a very steady team at both. I've been working with my cleaner in Virginia since early 2022. And then I've been now working with my cleaners in Nashville for the last few months since I transitioned to the self-management. That is so important. And I think not that it's not doable with somebody who's willing to take feedback and if you have a process well written out. But my biggest piece of advice is if finding a cleaner who has done short-term rentals. I think some of the hiccups I had initially were like, okay, like oftentimes if you have a cleaner in your own home, you're not going and you're not needing to look in any drawers. Well, one time somebody left their birth control in a drawer and then the next guest found it, or like straws. And it's like, everybody makes mistakes and like we're all human. But when I went and addressed those cleaners about it, there was more of the defensive and like, we don't do that. Okay, well, we talked about how this is a short-term rental. There's definitely pros and cons for the cleaner. On one hand, typically somebody's in there multiple times a week. So you're not necessarily having going into a house that hasn't been cleaned in a month, that someone's been there every single day, with their dogs and kids and everything. And you're going in there a lot more often. It's also like typically a little bit more minimal on design as well. And so you have less to actually clean. But with that being said, you need to be able to change the sheets, do the laundry. I guess some cleaners actually still do that for people's homes, but you have to change more beds. And then also, you do have to look, in some of the drawers and the cabinets to ensure, the pots and pans are clean, or to ensure there isn't any dirt or debris or things left over in the drawers. And so you don't have to teach that to somebody and experiment if somebody is already well versed from a cleaning aspect in short-term rentals and vacation rentals. So I feel like that would be one of my first pieces of advice. I think also having like a checklist. Whereas if you work with someone like Nicole or I, like we have that already out. Whereas, if you're doing it on your own and you're not leaning on somebody else for support, you need to make sure you write that out. And then you're probably going to hit some bumps along the way and have to add more. But that would probably be initially like the most important thing I could think of for self-managing.
Absolutely. I tell investors all the time, I'm like, co-hosts are important, but not nearly as important even as your cleaners are. And I don't think I've ever told this story, but it just made me think about it when you were saying opening cabinets. So when we first first started 3 years ago in October, one of our first guests, I think it was our first month still of ever being host. And the most embarrassing thing that's happened was we had a family there. The kids opened dresser drawers and there were condoms left in there. And the mom messages me like, my kids found condoms. They weren't open, thank God. They were unused condoms, but the mom was like, thank you. I had to explain what condoms were to my kids and my heart sunk. My stomach was down on the floor. I felt so sick. So that is definitely something with cleaners, setting those expectations. And we've never had that happen since then. But that was one of our first ever big cleaning issues, which when you look at the scheme of how much there is to clean in the house, like teeny item, not a big thing, but stuff like that will highly affect your reviews. And thank God we were able to work it out with her and she wasn't too upset at the end. And I think we gave a refund for part of her stay just for the embarrassment on our end of that. And our cleaner was also very embarrassed that she missed that. And like you said, though, people make mistakes and it was a learning lesson, but memory I haven't thought of in a while, but that was a fun part.
In the short time we've known each other and become friends, I can tell you're very emotionally intelligent. So I'm sure you fell on the sword and you were like, even though that was not directly your fault, you still can empathize with the situation. And I'm sure you handled it well, but I'm curious, like, what did you do? Like, did you get on the phone? Were you messaging them? Like, how did you go about it?
Oh yeah, that was an immediate thing where as soon as we got that message in, I'm calling her. I'm almost in tears because I get very emotional with our businesses and that kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, like people are paying a lot of money to come to these places most of the time. So the biggest thing I say, along with like your cleaners are number one, your communication as a host is going to be the second most important thing because issues are going to happen all the time. Even though we've been in this for 3 years now, you're going to have issues occur at your Airbnb. How you handle it as a host is what's going to make or break your reviews. And we've had tons of stuff from people showing up with an entirely green pool the day that they arrived. It turned overnight to having stuff missing in the house. Someone stole all of our nightstands out of a property and having to talk to that guest about it and having to have the cops called once. But we've never been left a really retaliatory review from a guest because we handled the situation with grace. And when it's something that you mess up on as a host, admit it. People usually want to be heard. We aren't huge on giving refunds because we think we can kind of talk our way through it. And we'll usually give a little gift, but I've never given a full refund for someone's stay. We've maybe offered an extra night for free if we had a gap in between our bookings. So you can offer stuff like that, but we've never given full refunds for issues. We've usually just been extremely apologetic, recognizing that there was an issue that occurred and taking fault for it. Because when you try to blame it back on the guest or blame it on someone else, none of us really handle that well, rather than someone admitting fault, saying sorry for the issue, and either sending a gift or even offering a late checkout. Little things like that go a long way if you're also being apologetic and recognizing that you made a mistake as a host. So yeah, that was a fun one with the condom. That was great.
You're so right too, because I don't know if you do this. I've never actually talked to anyone about this before, but sometimes I look, and this is like, even when I'm booking Airbnbs, I look to the way if they have negative reviews, and everyone's going to get negative reviews. But if somebody like a host responds super emotionally charged and like is pointing fingers and is like calling someone like a liar or whatever it is, just being kind of disrespectful, I'm like, that is a huge red flag. And I don't want to deal with that person. But if somebody gets a bad review and handles it with grace, I'm like, oh, okay. Even if they don't have a 5-star on Airbnb or VRBO, like I'm like, oh, that's okay, because things happen and you understand. You could literally give somebody the best experience and sometimes they're like critique one thing and you're like, how'd I get 3 stars? The other thing is like when there's a poor review, it's also like, can you learn from it? Because I've also noticed like a lot of times, like there's some truth to it. Sometimes I'm part of these like Facebook forums and pages and people are like, I just got this horrible review. And I'm like, okay, well, they mentioned that the code was wrong, or they mentioned that there were ants, or they mentioned that something was broken, or whatever it might be. It's a learning opportunity. So unless it's just a complete lie or it's retaliatory, which has happened, there's usually a way to learn from it and to improve the guest experience, like moving forward. So just kind of empathize with the guest, and see their point of view and how frustrating it is. And hopefully they'll return it with kindness. Sometimes they won't. And you just have to kind of brush it off and, move forward. Just taking a step back is helpful sometimes.
1,000%. And it's so funny in those Facebook groups seeing hosts that are like, this person shouldn't have been allowed to leave a 4 just because this happened. And it's like, no, they do deserve to leave a 4 because that issue occurred. And you see that so often in these groups. And I would say 95% of the reviews we've got that weren't a 5-star review, like what they left was true. And sometimes people will take those issues, and I don't think that it might be deserving of a 5-star, in my opinion, because I'm not one to usually leave bad reviews at places. But in that person's opinion, it was 4 stars. And I don't know what you do for your reviews, but like we try to explain the differences to our guests. We have those little magnets that you can put on your fridge at an Airbnb, kind of explaining a 5-star review in Airbnb's eyes is just that you had a good stay and it was a great time. And then a 4 would be there's issues that need to be addressed at the property. So I don't know if you do anything like that, but that's also how we sneakily do it.
I was going to say, if you could send me what you do for that, that's such a great idea. Since we're both hosting guests, it's like we can have that like learning share of like things that work and things that don't. So I would love to see what you do for that, because that's such a good idea. And I do agree. I have gotten marked down for certain things before that, like maybe it stayed on the listing. Like, for instance, at both of my places, there are stairs. It's unfortunately like not handicap accessible. But you do mark that on Airbnb and you can search that if you ever do need that. So unfortunately mine isn't, but I don't want to mislead anyone. But there's been times where somebody's like marked me down for that and it states it on the listing in multiple places. So it's unfortunate because it's like, okay, obviously they wish that they could, bring a wheelchair. But I was forthcoming ahead of time that that's not possible at my property. So I wish I wasn't, held accountable for that. Or maybe they don't like the smart locks. And so they didn't like, I don't know why, because that's my favorite, but like maybe they didn't like the check-in experience. I get marked down for that. And I'm like, dang it. So like that does happen. And I think some people do have certain expectations. It's so interesting because Nicole, you kind of like alluded to this, but I've stayed at a lot of Airbnbs and some situations have been less than ideal. I can think of one time I was traveling overseas with my family and the code was not working. I reread everything so many times. And because of a religious observance, they actually don't check their phones on this day of the week. So I couldn't get in. And even my dad was like, we're never doing an Airbnb again, even though I've always liked Airbnbs more than hotels. And I was like, oh no. And like, we ended up getting in like 45 minutes later, I guess they ended up checking. And I actually still left them a 5-star review. My mind didn't even go there. Like I stayed at another place where like, I don't know. It was old. There was like a cabin and like the towels weren't like my favorite and there was a couple things, but whatever. I didn't realize like how chill I am about certain things, or even the where we had to take the garbage out at this other place. I'm like going down memory lane right now. I guess we're doing that a lot today. It's like a mile away. And like, I don't ask my guests to take out the trash or anything. So there's been things that have been like less than ideal, but my mind doesn't just like go there. And then it's really interesting and it can give you a whiplash sometimes. But, one day your place is perfect. It's wonderful. The guest leaves a review like, oh my gosh, this place is heaven on earth. Then you get the next review and you could think your place is the worst and maybe you should drop out of the business. And then the next day, it's the best again. And I'm like, the experience was the same. Like, so you never know. So you definitely can't be too sensitive in the business. So even though I know you're the same, but I pour my heart and soul into it. And I really, 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 really care. And especially because a lot of people are traveling to celebrate their milestones. Like people travel to my Nashville one to celebrate bachelorettes. I've gotten a lot of 21st birthdays, 25th, 30th. I've had a 40th recently. I had a 60th at my one in Virginia. Like these are big milestones. And I'm like, it breaks my heart if somebody doesn't have a good experience. So, you got to care, but you also sometimes can't get so emotionally invested that like if you do get a bad review or somebody's unhappy with something out of your control and you do your best to fix it, you have to kind of realize like, don't take it too personally, like move forward, try to handle it the best you can, be empathetic and like move on.
Absolutely. And man, emotionally, when you first start, I feel like it's so much harder because you hear how you need 5-star reviews. And I think we got close to 100 reviews before I got my first 4-star. And I knew it was coming too. It was just a guest that I couldn't make happy. And it's again, like at that house, I think we had 45 5-star reviews, not with removing any bad ones. That's just like we had 45, got that first, and it was a 4-star. It still wasn't bad. And I was bawling for like the rest of the day. I was so upset. And looking back now, I'm like, that's pathetic that I was crying over this. But you do, when you actually really care about it, like you want these people to be having a great time. But at the end of the day, having one 4-star review out of even 50, I mean, it's not the end of the world. We have a 4.97 across all the listings we manage. So we have, thank you. And I forget, I have to actually count how many reviews, but like we just hit 80 reviews at one property with a 4.99, and the person that left a 4-star there, because it was just one 4-star for 4.99 and 80 reviews, they were upset that we didn't have dishwasher pods there, which was true. We ran out, but my cleaner didn't tell me. And the guest never brought it up until the end of their stay. And that's something where it's like, when she left the review, I was like, I am so sorry. I wish you would have let me know when you were there. I would have had them shipped immediately with Instacart. We could have fixed that. And so that was when I did try to get it removed by Airbnb, because I was like, I never had the chance to remedy that situation, which that's the biggest thing, again, with the communication. If you have the chance to remedy the situation, most of the time people are happy if you take care of that issue. And I think she also was upset because the house, it has this beautiful view and it's gorgeous, stunning view. But when you look over the wall and you look down on the hill, that's not blocking your view. You are up high on the hill. There's a shopping center down there. So if you look over, you can see a shopping center. And she didn't like that. Even though if you're in the yard and you're looking at the view, it's gorgeous. Like there's nothing blocking your view. So those were her two things, where those are both true statements. I can't refute that. It was just, and which I couldn't do anything about the view, that she didn't like the shopping center. But like with the pods, I could have ordered that and I wish I would have had the chance, but that's just how things go with reviews sometimes. But if you're doing the best you can and you're always communicating with your guests and your cleaners and that stuff, where now that was a good learning lesson. I'm like, look, like I just got a 4-star review from this because we didn't have, and everything else was perfect. I think we got a 5 on cleanliness, but because I didn't have dishwasher pods for her, and our cleaners were great at taking that feedback and never had that issue again. So you just have to make sure you are working, going back to the cleaners, like they're the most important part if they're kind of your eyes for the property, and making sure that they are on board with making it a truly luxurious or just a 5-star experience for your guest.
For sure. And that also reminded me of a story. So, okay, I have something though, a tip for you, and maybe you're already doing this about that view of the property. So something that I do is, one of my properties is right next to, kind of looks like Arlington National Cemetery. So it's like a very pretty one, and it's the one in Hampton. But there's some people, especially if someone's more superstitious, they don't want to be by that. So some people are like, I love this, and some people, I don't like it. How I've now mitigated that, and sometimes people overlook it, but I put that in the description so that there's no surprises. So I don't know if you want to do that with the shopping center, just so that, you can kind of mitigate that. And so if somebody reads that and they have an issue with that, then that's another form for you to go to Airbnb if you ever do need a dispute and say, like, this was in the listing, or even stating that to the person who said. So I'm just saying, I've heard over communicating is like important to mitigate some of that stuff if you get docked for location. Okay. I have gotten a 1-star review before, and I'm pretty sure I wasn't able to get it removed, which is definitely a hit. But I will say the silver lining is similar to yours, where the person kind of looked a little crazy, because if everything before was a 5-star and everything after was a 5-star with a glowing review, I don't think people hold me accountable. Not to mention, it's kind of the same theory of like, have you ever heard about when like either jobs or colleges actually like to accept the person who doesn't have the 4.0 GPA? Because they like to see that they can handle adversity.
Absolutely.
kind of like a similar situation. I think that I was really proud of my response because I wasn't able to get it removed. And I just felt like it was, emotionally intelligent, mature. I addressed it. I apologized. But unfortunately, it's like, even in some of the categories, it's like, why did you knock me as one for everything? Like, even like communication, I'm like, I communicated well. It's like they were upset about something and then decided to do it for all categories. So I know when I stay at an Airbnb or even when I rate a guest, I really try to be fair. Like, to be honest, even if they were throwing parties, they violated all my rules, this and that. But then, like, let's say the house was really clean. Well, I'm not going to give them a 1 for that. I'm still going to give them a 5 for the house being clean, but maybe they didn't communicate, they didn't answer anything. Well, I'm going to dock them for that. But I try to be fair in all categories, but some people don't, and that's unfortunate. But if you want to laugh, 2 months later, they tried to book again.
That makes me want to cry, like laughing, because it's just like, it was that horrible? You want to come back? Excuse me?
Okay. Typically, if it's super unfair and it violates a policy on Airbnb, I know what I need to bring to them as evidence to get it removed. But I will compliment Airbnb on this for their neutrality. I also think they want to be able to provide the most honest reviews of the hosts and the places so that guests know what they're getting into. So if anything, some of the time, like, it is very fair for guests. And so they didn't really want to remove it. But then I went back to them and I was like, hey, this guest, is trying to rebook. Can we get this removed? And you can also see the next 10 stays I had all said the opposite. And they didn't remove it. But once again, all good. But yeah, I just thought I would tell you. I was like, oh my God, that was the closure I needed. That the fact that they tried to book again.
I would have been so angry. You handled that with grace. That would have been a situation where I would have definitely been a little bit pissed off. And we've had situations where, I don't know if you've actually went to the guest after, and never doing this in a mean way, but I will go to the guest if they have left a 4-star review and it was something, maybe it wasn't very clear on why they left that review, or it was a situation where I found it a little bit unfair on my part. So I'll actually reach out to the guest and say, thank you so much for leaving your feedback. I appreciate you bringing these to my attention. If it was something that happened during this stay and they brought it up, then I changed the verbiage a bit. But if it was something that I wasn't truly aware of, I apologize. And I kind of explain, I'm like, look, we're a small business. We actually do truly care about your stay. And I'm so sorry that this wasn't a 5-star experience for you. Is there any way you would consider removing your review and offer maybe a discount on their next stay? Because we usually get 4 stars. It's been a long time since I've had anything less than 4. So I've had probably 5 or so people actually take down their review too when reaching out to them and saying, look, I got this issue fixed today that you brought up. I think we had an oven that was out of order and that just wasn't something tucked by the cleaner. And I was like, we got a new oven put in yesterday. Like, I appreciate you bringing it to my attention in the review. I wish you would have brought it to my attention sooner. But that's been one way to get some people. But man, I would have been pissed if I got a 1-star review and they tried to rebook. So you're a better person than I am.
I should have actually tried at the time, and I have learned the tactic that you've said, but at the time I didn't think about having them remove it. And I think, is there a certain time frame that they would have to remove it?
I don't believe so. I think it can always be removed going forward.
Wow, well, then I should have used that as leverage, because I'm sure when they tried to book it a couple months later, I ended up turning them down respectfully. I was just like, hey, like, kind of like, I think maybe because of what had happened, you'd be best suited to stay at another place. And she was just like, I understand.
I don't know if I would have risked having another 2-3-star review from that person.
One time, actually, I also got a bad review because I didn't get them eggs. She made a bunch of special requests.
I had a request for ice because the person didn't like the ice or how much ice was coming out of the fridge. And I guess they were going through a lot of ice and was like, hey, let me know if you need anything during your stay. That's our normal message. And he was like, yes, I would like a bag of ice. I'm like, oh.
He took that literally. He took that
Don't
request.
live in the area. And I needed new towels there too. So I ended up shipping him a bag of ice from Walmart delivery. And I was like, I need new towels. I was going to place an order after he left anyways. So I had my towels and his bag of ice. And he was very happy. He was one of those people, though, that you'll get some weird requests.
Well, that obviously was worth it.
Yes, it was worth the $2 for the ice. So it was totally fine, but always funny when in this industry. But I know we talked about this a little bit earlier and didn't really get to touch on it much, but what strategies have you used to increase your income? I know the Nashville place, it wasn't totally going as expected. And I think you did a total before and after, if I remember from your Instagram, that you totally revamped the place.
I would say the decor piece has gotten so important. That's actually my favorite part. I actually do design and decorating for Airbnbs as well for clients. So whether or not they just want me to virtually design it, or if they want me to actually go and physically set it up, hire any contractors we need. Maybe it's for like paint. Not that I can't dabble with the paint and the wallpaper a little bit, but depending on like the time frame, because oftentimes like they want it listed super quickly so they can start making money on it. So I've gotten really effective with being able to schedule that while I'm there, set up the furniture and all of that to do it and design it. Because I think that's getting more important. It used to be like a few years ago where like anybody could list a place and they were successful. Well, the market's getting a little more saturated. It's still a great, amazing investment opportunity, but you really have to make it fun. So I made sure both of mine were themed. I made sure the ones for my clients were themed. I did a really fun one recently, the Cosmic Cowgirl Condo, which is super niche in Nashville for a client, which is really cool. And I'm also looking forward to doing a fun one in Florida, which is also amazing because I've gotten to partner with Nicole as the agent, since she is an agent in Florida, on that. So I'm really looking forward. I love the funky, fun designs, but sometimes, clients end up wanting something a little neutral. I do push back in certain aspects depending on the market, because that is just such an important piece. The other thing that I do is I have, for my personal places, and I'm also able to do this for clients, is I have social media pages, which has really helped. So if you want to see them, one is Pretty in Pink, INN, like in, punny, Airbnb on Instagram and TikTok. And then the other one is Chanel by the Shore. So I try on those to showcase the property, showcase some of the guests that stay there. I have a certain methodology for that, as well as some of the local attractions in the area and the restaurants and all that. And that's been another way where I've gotten a lot of traction from. So that's been a super creative and fun way for me to be able to drive bookings and revenue as well.
I love that. And it's very new, I feel like, still, for starting to really advertise your places on social media. But when you think about it, how often, I've never actually stayed at a place because I've seen it on social media, but I do decide where I want to go vacation or where I want to go on my next trip from social media. And I think that's just going to turn into more of, oh yeah, like, okay, I want to go here. What are the cool places to go visit here? And I feel like Google Travel will start to be big too. I was just talking to a potential client about that the other day, where they have the Google Flights now, and I use Google a million times a day. So I feel like Airbnb is still great. We've talked about how that's majority of our bookings for both of us. I mean, we're at 77%, I think, are where our bookings come from. So Airbnb is obviously huge still, but I think we're going to start to see more trends of people actually looking on social media or using Google Travel to try to really decide where they want to stay next. And I've seen some creative ways recently of people pushing from Airbnb to their direct bookings, which you're not technically allowed to do, but I've seen some people in the space start to add a QR code onto their Airbnb listing, which then can take them to their direct booking site. And it saves money for both parties. I mean, we're saving as a host, not having to pay the Airbnb fee, and the guests get to save on their end too with not having to pay Airbnb, because it's expensive. We have a lot of people always asking for discounts. And I'm like, sorry, you're asking for the amount that Airbnb is collecting. Like, we're not getting that extra $800. People will ask, can I have $800 off? I'm like, nope, that's everything Airbnb is collecting. And that would be $800 straight out of our pocket, or having to, like, we're losing our cleaning fee for when people are asking for which our cleaning fees are a lot less than $800, but just people are asking for big discounts. And we've been like, oh, you can check out our Instagram to try to get people to start booking directly.
That's smart.
They allow that. So you can start pushing them. Like if they're like, oh, I'm looking for a discount. I'm like, if you follow our Instagram, you might see discounts getting posted there, which we don't post, but then they find our business name and then we're able to get them direct.
Smart. Really, really smart.
Always the little tricks. And I'm sure you have some up your sleeve too. And with the Virginia market, let's just start there first. Have there been any surprises from expenses or just your general income of like, I know you were saying there, you initially were like, yeah, we'll just rent out over summertime. So has that been a surprise property for you of how well it's performed?
Yes. So it has been excellent. I did have a hiccup though. So the builder it was a brand new build and I didn't know, not being familiar with the market at first. And now I know to look for this when I'm working with clients or for my own investments, was notorious for not doing things right. And he made a faulty balcony. So that was a big expense and totally ignored like the home warranty for the first year. And now I better know how to combat that. But that was a big hiccup. And then for Nashville, at the time, that was when the zoning laws had just come into effect. And even though I had bought the place and was promised that it was zoned correctly, it was, but they had to switch the permit from it being like a hotel to it being a short-term rental. And the builder had said it was going to happen before closing. It ended up taking 6 months. So I got creative and found some people to book kind of a little bit as like a midterm. But because I kept being promised the next day, I didn't have them stay for more than a couple months thinking that, because obviously for midterm rentals, long-term rentals, you don't make as good of ROI on it. So I didn't know how long it was going to take. So I did have some hiccups, but it's definitely being able to be recuperated, which is great. And also like my mortgage for the places are 30 years. I don't have plans to sell them. So little hiccups at the beginning were okay. But I guess that kind of leads to like one of my pieces of advice would be to just ask for help or get help or hire somebody who kind of knows what they're doing already and has gone through some of the growing pains that like Nicole and I have, because we're able to help. And that does actually save you thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So it is worth the initial investment to work with somebody who knows what they're doing so you don't make the same mistakes.
1,000%. And I was telling someone else this where I'm like, I did kind of have a mentor when I got started, but I think having help with analyzing the markets that you're looking to enter into is one of the hardest parts. And I'm seeing a lot of people come to me still with these deals where they're like, I want to buy in this market. And I'm like, I highly don't recommend investing in this market anymore. I had someone that was like, I want to invest in Orlando. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Orlando is a market now where a lot of these 3-4 bedroom houses are making $40,000 a year, which with interest rates where they are, you can't cash flow unless you have some magic deal that you found. Most of these regular houses on market, you're not going to be able to get any cash flow out of that. And then all the mistakes that come after. I mean, finding the right investment property is number one with the location, but you're going to make a million mistakes. And I still make mistakes that you're constantly learning and evolving. But if you have someone you're working with initially, you can solve a lot of those issues. And even for our newer hosts, there's things that they are so panicked about I'm trying to think of one example. It's just been little things where it's like when you first start hosting, you're like, oh my God, this issue is going to be a 1-star review. And after you've been doing it for a while, you're like, no, that's not a huge issue. Like we don't need to do a full refund or anything like that. Versus when we first started, we would give refunds out a whole lot more, and we'd send handyman out immediately for maybe something like our worst one was New Year's Eve. It was literally midnight. I was in bed. I wasn't watching the fireworks, but the guest messaged us and they were like, your sink's not draining. So we sent a handyman out New Year's Eve with a $500 bill for him to come out for 2 minutes and get bottle caps that they threw down the sink. And that was something where 1,000% could have waited till the next day, been $200-$300 cheaper. And I would have charged that back to the guests because they were the ones that threw all the bottle caps down the sink. That wasn't our fault. So it's like you just learn all these things as you start hosting. But if you're working with someone that's familiar with that, you can save so much money on making sure that you're actually using your money wise for your furnishing. So like contacting Britney to make sure that your money is being spent wisely, because it's so easy now to spend $30,000 on a setup, but spend it in the wrong way. I see a lot of people that bought these super expensive bed frames and nightstands, and the rest of the house is just really bland. And I'm like, unfortunately, those two items aren't going to be what does it. And we were talking about this with the property the other day. We're like, really pretty stuff that they put in there, but not for a short-term rental. And I know that they spent a lot of money on those pieces, but that's not going to be the return on investment that you want to see for your short-term rental.
You're so right. And like, even though like clients can span across like different types of budgets, a lot of the ones I've done have been people that are more on a budget. So we want to make sure their money is used wisely. So it's like, what's the most important? Obviously, like you want to have like sturdy pieces and you want to have really comfortable mattresses, but you don't have to go top of the line on everything, because a lot of people are wanting something fun. Like they're wanting like a fun wallpaper, fun paint, fun decor, a wall that's like Instagrammable, whatever that might be. Like there's different priorities. And so knowing that, especially depending on the market, is just so big. But if you're kind of just going at it blindly by yourself, I mean, it's unfortunate if like a couple years in, then you're like, okay, my place is not getting booked. It's not doing well. Now I need to hire somebody. It's like, you could have just done that from the beginning, gotten the help you needed. And like that literally directly impacts your revenue. So I find it very fun. It's very enjoyable. I'm able to kind of, use that creative side of my brain, which I enjoy. And then it's also just rewarding because getting to see those like reviews flood in from like, okay, like I had a property that I set up in August. We were able to get it set up in 5 days, which everybody's like, how? It usually takes 2 weeks. I worked like all day long, really hustled. And we got it listed within a couple of days. And then it was already getting bookings. And so within like a month, being able to see like 5 different reviews of people like raving about the decor, that just like set us up for success for more people to book. And then we were able to actually increase the prices even higher than what we had thought. And I'm like, wow, it's just amazing how you can have the same house, the same updates to the house, same location. It could be next door neighbors, and one could be bringing in tens of thousands of dollars more just from the design piece. So if anybody's listening and wants help on this, like definitely reach out, and I'd love to, talk to you about it in the future. But that is definitely something that I'd say is one of the most important parts.
Totally agree on that. And there's still a lot of markets missing fun houses like that. I am always looking at new markets, and we're in San Angelo, Texas right now. And I'm like, there's no houses. So this is going to be one of the only houses in the area with some fun wallpaper on it and some bright colors, and not just your typical farmhouse style. So being able to really stand out in your marketplace is for sure one of the keys to being successful in today's short-term rental world.
And I love the wallpaper you chose.
Thank you. I know it's nice and bright, and it actually perfectly matched with the bed frame. I was really excited about that with the colors. But thank you so much for joining me today. It was absolutely wonderful getting to chat with you. And if someone did want to reach out to have help with design or management, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
So I would say my Instagram would probably be the best. I know I mentioned the 2 houses, but for my actual consulting and investing business, it's just Wambold Properties. So it's WAMBOLD Properties, and you can find me on Instagram.
Perfect. And thank you for spelling your last name. Because I was like, I don't know if anyone's it's such a fun last name, but I wasn't sure if anyone would spell it. So we'll also have it linked down below. But again, thank you so much. It was wonderful having you on today.
Awesome. Thank you again, Nicole.